Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Emily Genther. I am one of the health coaches that we have on staff here with our lifestyle medicine department. I want to take just a moment and check in and see how this challenge has been going for you for week 1. The idea is to eat lots of different colors for fruits and vegetables throughout the week. Just remember that with any challenge or goal that we're working on, you want to remember to meet yourself where you're at. The idea is that we're just aiming to eat a little bit more plants than we were beforehand. Small successes add up, just as Dr. Arts mentioned in the last webinar that we have. So find a spot that works best for you. Today, our webinar is going to be about navigating food additives and label reading. And we are so thankful to have Kristi Veldkamp here today. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist with Corewell Health, and she teaches nutrition classes to the community and also provides one-on-one nutrition counseling services. She graduated from Northern Illinois University for her internship, and her master's degree is in nutrition. Kristi also does hold a certification as a health coach and a sports dietitian. She has educated thousands of people in her nutrition classes and in one-on-one nutrition coaching for over 10 years on how to add food as medicine and how to enjoy eating. She really does enjoy food and cooking with the focus of making dishes both nutritious and really tasty as well. I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. So just remember that as questions pop up, we do encourage you to add them to the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and we will save a little bit of time at the end for questions as well too. We will try to answer as many as we can during the presentation. Please note too that as you're joining the webinar, your audio and video is off. So the Q&A is going to be the best route for reaching us. And I will leave it to you, Kristi, for taking it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. Hopefully you find this an interesting topic. I know it's a question that comes up a lot for people that I talk to. So we'll dig in and like Emily said, we'll get into those questions at the end. So feel free to throw those in as you go. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at what to look for on the nutrition label, how to navigate that, what in the world is a processed food, and what are food additives, the top ingredients to avoid, and what does that mean for us and our eating. So, oops, there we go. How many of you have wondered this, right? What exactly is in the food that I'm eating? So many things that we see on the nutrition label, and try to figure out what's the best option here. So first thing I want to point out is don't judge a book by its cover, right? There's a lot of marketing that goes into the front of a package. So I'm always telling people, you got to look at the label. There's so many tricks that food companies do to try to get you to buy their stuff. And so I'm not trying to promote or not promote any certain thing that's popping up. I just literally Googled, fat-free candy as an example, and this popped up. But there's a lot of these catchy terms that we see on packages that kind of draw us in, maybe a little confusing, try to figure out, what does that mean? Is this something that's good or not? So some of the ones that kind of popped into my head initially, sugar-free, fat-free, like in this example. And some people look at that and go, oh, I'm trying to watch my fat grams, and so this is a good option. Usually when things are sugar-free, they're adding artificial sweeteners, right, to make it taste good, or they might add extra fats. Low-fat things tend to have more sugar to make up for flavor. Made with whole grains just means there's some whole grains in there. It doesn't mean it's 100% whole grains. All natural is a very vague term. It doesn't have a lot of specific guidelines. And even with organic, both all natural and organic foods, I mean, you can get an organic cake and ice cream It doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, right? Um, Gluten-free has been kind of a popular trend too, as well as keto. And so, if you don't fully understand what that means, it can be a draw to look at different packaging. Gluten-free is for people with food allergies. If you don't have an allergy to it, it's not something you need to be concerned about, but marketing food companies are using that to market. And so that kind of draws you in. I've seen it on fruit where it says naturally gluten-free. So again, it kind of goes back to just that draw that they're trying to get you to buy their products. Keto products are, our keto diet is very high in fat and low in carbs. And so those type of products tend to have a lot of oils added into them. High fiber, heart healthy. Again, sometimes they're adding fiber to an already processed food like a muffin or cupcake. And so they put this high fiber stamp on there to get that label and draw people in. So say all that to say, don't use the front of the package to determine what it is that you're buying. Everything comes down to what's in the food, what's on the label. So you always want to turn the package over. You always want to read the ingredients. I always tell people you have to be that food investigator when you are shopping. It does take a little bit more time, right? To figure out what are the best products. But again, the food companies don't care. They're just trying to sell products. If you care what's going in your body, you're going to take that extra time to look and see what is in here. What is this product? So most people recognize this, right? It's our nutrition facts label. And most people, I would say, that I've talked to, look at the label. Maybe there's specific things you're looking for, calories, fat grams, sodium, etc. And those are all important, but probably the most important thing, that at least in my opinion, is like what is in here, because it could be a low fat food, like I said, with like certain candies. Oh, the fat grams are low, but what else is in there? How much sugar is in there? How much sodium? Those are additives, so those are nice to kind of see those exact amounts. But it's not telling you where it's coming from, right? It's also not telling you what else is added in there that doesn't have calories, those preservatives and things. So my biggest, point is that it's more about the ingredients, not just the nutrition facts, not just the numbers. Always go down to that ingredient section on the label. So let's look at some definitions before we jump in too deep. We talk a lot about processed foods. Just when it comes to eating healthy, right? Don't eat processed food. Well, what is that? It's a really, really good question that most people don't think about. Some people define it as, anything in a box or anything from the store. There's a very broad way to think about processed food. So in the simplest sense, a processed food is anything that's changed from its natural state. So something like peanut butter, where the only ingredient is peanuts, is technically a processed food, right? Because it's changed from its natural state. They've taken the peanut and ground it into peanut butter. You still have all the components of that food in there. They haven't removed any nutrients. They haven't added anything. They've just mechanically processed that food. So there's minimally processed, and then there's more ultra processed. So that example of the peanut butter would be more of a minimally processed food. Also things even just like, rolled oats or whole wheat flour, right? They're just grinding it into flour. All the nutritional components of that food are still there. The fiber is still there. All the vitamins and the minerals are still there. They just mechanically altered it by grinding it, right? So that's the best case scenario, right? Minimally processed foods, that's what we want to shoot for. But then we run into the other extreme, are these ultra processed. And that's kind of more what we're talking about when we're saying avoiding processed foods. And so in this case, sometimes they are actually removing some of the nutrients from some of the foods, for example, like white flour. They are stripping off the fiber from the original whole grain. They're removing a lot of the germ, which has a lot of the vitamins and nutrients and minerals that are in the whole grain. So you're left with more just starch. And then they're often adding more things to that. So it could be added sugars, oils, preservatives, colorings, artificial flavorings, etc. So again, there's kind of a broad range. But when we talk about processed foods, usually we're thinking more of these ultra processed, right? Things that aren't really, they're not even really food anymore. They've really gotten far from their natural state. So what we're honing in more is on what these additives are that are in a lot of these ultra processed foods, and even just things that aren't necessarily ultra processed, but they're used in a lot of products to keep them shelf stable, maybe to enhance flavor. So this is the technical definition of a food additive that I got directly from the FDA's website. It is a very complex definition. Any substance, the intended use of which results or may be reasonably be expected to result directly or indirectly in its becoming a component or otherwise affecting the characteristic of any food. So very, very technical. My eyes get drawn a little bit further down where it talks, including any source of radiation. This is what goes through my head, right? What? Wait a second. What's getting thrown into our food here? In a very short, simple way to think about it, right? It's anything that's being added to a food, whether it's from when they're packaging it or producing it or transporting it, or whether it's, to hold it or just keep it more shelf stable. Anything that becomes a component of the food that we're eventually going to eat is considered an additive, okay? So that's what we're going to look at here. So you saw this term mentioned in that definition, things that fall under the GRAS definition. So that stands for generally recognized as safe. This is a way that a lot of food companies get their additives approved to put in their products. The downside is it's not very stringent. And so it can open the door to potentially harmful substances. It's a little bit of a good faith type of approval, where it's more, well, we haven't seen anything from this type of food or product that has, that gives us reason to cause harm. And so therefore it's okay to add to our food. So it's definitely more loose. And there are thousands of different food additives. We're not going to go through all of them today. And I couldn't even tell you, if you asked me certain ingredients, if it's good or not, because there's just too many to know. But we're going to look at some of the top ones today. So before I jump in to each of these, I always want to point out as well, there's always conflicting information on research. Certainly if there was very clear evidence that some of these were harmful, they would be out. But so there's always going to be some of that. But for a lot of them, other countries have found enough evidence that they have banned them. And so you will see that kind of throughout as we go through some of these. Other countries have banned a lot of the preservatives that we use in our products. And then there's, enough evidence to have some caution. And in my mind, if it's not a food product or thing that we can recognize and pronounce, When in doubt, leave it out. There have been products or ingredients already that have been used in our foods that we find later on, oh, turns out this wasn't good for us, and then they remove them, right? So why even subject yourself to having these in your diet? Trans fat, for example, is one of them that was used extensively as people were trying to cut out fats, saturated fats and butter. And they were trying to make foods more shelf stable and have a good mouthfeel and texture. Trans fats came out. And turns out it caused a lot of inflammation and heart disease. And so that got banned in so many countries, and they're finally, getting it out of most foods now. So that happens, right? So we want to be careful and making sure that we're eating actual food. And like I said, because they're not necessarily being stringent about what goes in ours, we need to be that food investigator. So I am going to start with the Dirty Dozen Guide to Food Chemicals. This you can actually find from the Environmental Working Group listed there at the bottom. Some of you may are familiar with their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 list for organic produce. And this is where that comes from. So if you want to get more information, feel free to check out that website. Again, they do the best they can with the research. So we're going to start with these and then get into some of the ones that I have added a little further on. So first on the list, we have nitrates and nitrites. These are preservatives used in cured meats and possible links to cancers. So the American Cancer Association has that listed as, one of the things to avoid when it comes to avoiding cancers. And you'll find this in most packaged meats, right? So lunch meats, hot dogs, sausages. And this is both the ones that are from the meat counter or the ones that are over by, your lunch meats, prepackaged. So, we talk about trying to limit meats themselves, but this is a whole nother reason why we should be watching our meat intake is these nitrates. Next is potassium bromate. And you can see banned also in the European Union. So these are used in flour, in packaged baked goods. Seeing some links to cancers possibly. And so again, looking on the food labels for that, propylparaben, another one that's banned in the European Union. Also used in pastries and tortillas, finding some possible developmental and reproductive harm in those. Next is butylated hydroxyanisole. I may even be pronouncing that wrong, BHA. The other thing you'll notice when you're reading labels is they'll abbreviate things too. So a lot of times they'll put the abbreviations in there to kind of hide, what those, I'm sure they're trying to save space, but it makes it a little harder to know what you're getting, right? So like be aware too of some of the abbreviations that they will use as well. But this is another preservative in cured meats, right? So another cancer trigger here. So I wanted to show you a product example. There I've highlighted bleached bromated wheat. So we just talked about, let me go back here a sec. Potassium bromate, right? And so just knowing that word is in there puts up a caution. TBHQ, again, another abbreviated one. We're going to get to that in a minute. So we haven't quite covered that yet. But those are just two that are on my top list. But look at what else is in here. I just thought this was interesting. I just highlighted ones that are on our list to avoid, but how much food ingredients are actually food on here? We've got yeast extracts, right? We've got enriched flour. I see like peas and carrots. potatoes, but the rest, calcium chloride, modified food starches, hydrolyzed corn, like these are all non-food ingredients, right? Very small percentage of things listed on here are actual foods. So, red flag, right? Um, but I'm not opposed to packaged foods, right? Like I'm not saying you don't eat them. I think there are some really good options out there. Sometimes it's a little bit more pricey only because they're not using preservatives and really inexpensive products. They're using good quality ingredients. And so it's much more worth the cost. So something like this, in comparison, we'll look at the ingredients. Tomatoes, garlic, wine, olive oil, bunch of spices and vegetables, whole grains, even. This is a kicker, right? Actual whole grains. I think the only thing in here that's not a food is natural flavor, right? I can handle that. Still a little vague, but not on my bad list. So if you need to have, like we're a in a fast-paced society, right? We're busy schedules. Sometimes we can't cook everything from scratch. There are healthier grab and go options out there. Again, you just got to look. There's not as many, but they are out there. So just to give you an example, right? This is a vast difference in these products right here. All right, continuing on our Dirty Dozen list. Here we have titanium dioxide next, again, banned in the European Union. This is a coloring that they add to anything coloring, a lot of candies, things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about colorings too. Brominated vegetable oil, BVO, banned in the European Union. Helps to stabilize citrus flavors in sodas and fruity drinks. Some neurological harm there, possibly. Another couple BHT and TBH, also big words. Butylated hydroxytoluene. So these are, again, similar to some of the ones we talked about, a lot of preservatives in these kind of like packaged green product type of foods. So more effects on cancers or our immune system. Again, there's always the saying that you hear if you can't pronounce it or it sounds like it's coming from a chemistry lab, probably a good idea to leave those out. So here's an example. Fruit Loops, and this is actually, yeah, Australia versus the US. So they have a lot less preservatives. They're using different colorings that are actually like from fruits and vegetables. Now there's still like sugar in there, right? It's still not going to be the healthiest option, but just interesting, right? That there's such a big difference from the same company. Side note, I was at Aldi and took a look at their cereals, and they have done a pretty good job of eliminating a lot of additives and preservatives in their products, and their version of the Captain Crunch was similar to where it was whole oats and corn, whole grain corn flour. The colorings were all food colorings like paprika, like you have listed here, beet juice, things like that they use to color. So I actually was like, wow, actually all of these ingredients are food-based. It's a whole grain. Of course, again, the only downside is it had a lot of sugar in it, but it was just interesting, to see the difference there. So on the right, you can see the ingredients here, where there's hydrogenated oil. We'll talk about that. I mentioned that as a trans fat. Lots of the food colorings, and then the BHG we just talked about in the cereals. So the only thing too, I'll say, most Grain products are often fortified with vitamins, and that's what you see listed at the end here, vitamins and minerals, vitamin C, iron, niacin. So those can sound like chemicals, right? Those aren't words we're familiar with. We recognize vitamin C, but we might not know that that means ascorbic acid, right? Vitamin B, riboflavin. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're reading labels too. They often have vitamins added. Obviously, those are fine. And they usually have those listed that stating that that's what they are. So keep that in mind as well. All right, the last part of our daily dozen list, or dirty dozen, sorry. um, they had PFAS, which many of you, if you're in West Michigan area, are probably familiar with, as there was a lot of that they were finding in some of the water. Obviously, it's not something that is an ingredient, but sometimes can be used in food packaging. So there's, it's just kind of a awareness factor. And then artificial colors. You mentioned the titanium oxide earlier. And so here it's just any colorings, they usually list them out in the different numbers, right? Red, blue lake, and all the different numbers that they have. And these are all banned in most other countries. So again, possible developmental difficulties in children. I know there's always controversy in some of these areas, but again, it's enough to where they're seeing some evidence to have to take those out. Same thing with artificial sweeteners. These are only banned in baked goods, but again, it makes you wonder. These are a little bit harder to find only because they like to use the scientific name in the ingredient list. So aspartame, most people are familiar with. Sucralose is that scientific name for Splenda. Aspartame K, saccharin. These are probably the most common ones that you're going to find. So be aware, these are the ones you'll see listed in the ingredient list. Finding several different kind of like questions on these artificial sweeteners. Some maybe links to cancers, reduced glucose tolerance, meaning higher blood sugars. It can affect our gut microbiome, so like our digestion, how well we're absorbing food, and also can affect like our hormones that regulate our metabolism. So there are a lot of studies that really show people that drink artificial sweeteners for weight loss, there is no connection to people losing weight by drinking these diet products. So I always caution people, if you find a package that says sugar-free, 90% of the time you're going to find some of these artificial sweeteners in there. You want to look for unsweetened, then it's not going to have any sweetener, whether it's artificial or added sugar. So again, just being aware of that, trying to gradually wean off some of those type of foods. They're going to be in foods typically that aren't giving you much nutrition either. So trying to get in more water, teas, things like that, as far as the beverages go. And then heavy metals, similar to PFAS, it's not an additive, but it's something that can build up depending on the region. So again, those are just up there for awareness. Those aren't necessarily food additives. And you can access the list if you want to, this Dirty Dozen list from their website. Another example here. Skittles, there's our colors I mentioned, red 40, lake, yellow 5, there's titanium dioxide, all the things. And then hydrogenated oil. So it's kind of, again, double whammy, nothing good here. They have different types of colorings used over in the European version. They use palm fat instead of hydrogenated oil. So still not awesome, but just interesting. And this is a few others that I added as I was doing some more research, some things that I tend to warn people on as well when it comes to labels. Parabens is another one that's banned in the European Union. Used as a preservative in some candies and baked goods. So again, just kind of like keeping an eye out for that one. And then I mentioned this one before, hydrogenated oils. So that's the chemical scientific name for trans fat. You're not going to see the word trans fat in a ingredient list. It's always going to be hydrogenated. Let me go back to hydrogenated palm kernel oil. You'll see different types of oil that are hydrogenated. So just look out for that word when it comes to oils. And that's basically a trans fat. It makes the oil more solid and shelf stable. It's found in margarines, powdered creamers. Also, I noticed in powdered hot cocoa, baked good, fried foods. Like I said, increased heart disease and inflammation. I find this interesting. I looked at some margarines, and there was one marketed as a heart healthy option. It had these plant sterols in there that are really heart healthy, which they are, but they had all these processed oils in this margarine along with hydrogenated oils. So I just thought that was very interesting that they're marketing this as heart healthy because it has one ingredient in it that helps lower cholesterol, but then they're going and they're adding trans fat in it, which we know causes heart disease. So just goes to show you really have to be careful with what you're buying and know what you're getting. I've also seen hydrogenated oils in peanut butters. If you're not getting just the natural, version of peanut butter. Again, a lot of like packaged foods. Fried food naturally is higher in hydrogenated oils. So just being careful, being aware of those foods that you're eating. Another one I threw on here is BPA. Again, this is not an additive that they're going to have on the ingredients list, but it's usually in the packaging. And this can cause some reproductive issues. They're finding more links to polycystic ovarian syndrome, which really affects a lot of the female kind of reproductive hormones and throws all that off. And so I always encourage, probably the biggest thing is canned foods that you're going to find this in. And most canned foods will have BPA unless it says on the packaging BPA free. So it'll be in a lot of plastics as well. So you just want to find BPA free plastic, especially if you're microwaving plastic, it'll leach more into your food. So I have been seeing a lot more products that are BPA free for canned foods. And again, all of their stuff is BPA free. So that's awesome. They've gotten rid of a lot of these harmful additives. So be aware of that, take a look at the cans, at the labels to look for BPA free. Phosphates was another one I found that was on the banned list in the European Union, and they're only banning it in infant foods as of now. Fun fact, BPA also is banned in infant products as well for like formula and bottles and whatnot. Those are banned in the US. So again, it makes you wonder if it's banned there, why is it not banned in the rest? So phosphates are used as a preservative and color enhancer, often in colas and meats. So kind of accelerates the aging process, can damage blood vessels. So not fun. Who wants to age faster? Nobody. So, oh, here's the example. I think I might be breaking some people's heart. I know Jif is it's just been around forever, right? It's nostalgic. Um, but they do like to add that hydrogenated vegetable oil. They do have same brand, has different versions that don't use it. So again, check out the labels. I also highlighted, I didn't put this on my list, mono and diglycerides has been taking the place of hydrogenated oils as they've been removing them. And so they're still thinking, they might have similar effects as the hydrogenated oils. So the jury is still out on that one, but be aware, again, it's not a whole food. So always a caution. And then here's our fun natural peanut butter, right? Just one ingredient, peanuts. Can't go wrong. All right. And finally, the last ones we're going to look at, I believe these are the last ones. Added sugars. I think most of us are familiar with that, right? We don't think of it as like a chemical, obviously, right? But it does over time, it can lead to a lot of health issues, right? Insulin resistance, which leads to the high blood sugars, liver damage, inflammation, can affect our brain health, blood pressure, not to mention cavities, right? And other things like that. And they get creative with how they hide this as well. I think the nice thing is they have a line right on the packaging that says added sugars. And so it makes it really easy to see how much you're getting. I don't worry too much about natural sugar, right? Fruit. That's fresh, not juices, but really pay attention to the added sugars. It is recommended for women to stay under 24 grams per day of added sugar and for men under 36 as reference. So use that as you're looking at labels. It's likely impossible to completely avoid added sugars, right? So you get a little bit of wiggle room in there. But do look, like sometimes it's just a matter of grabbing a different product off the shelf. I've seen added sugar in marinara sauces, a lot of condiments. I've seen them in crackers where it just blows my mind, like I'm looking for, not a sweet snack. So I'm getting into some crackers and you're getting sugar. And those little bits add up through the day. Where I've had some people I've talked to that, are struggling with getting their blood sugars down. And when we look at what they're eating, they would say, I don't really eat sweets. But when we really break down the labels of some of the foods they're eating, turns out they're getting in quite a bit of added sugar. So that's a fun challenge to yourself, is to maybe count up the sugar grams that you're actually getting in each day and see where you're at. They also get creative with the names of sugar on the labels. Like I said, easy way is the nutrition facts. Boom, you'll be able to see added sugars. But they'll even use things like fruit purees, cane syrup, things like that sound better, but it's still just sugar, right? So being aware of all those different names they might use can also help. The next one is sodium benzoate and potassium sorbate. These are in beverages to prevent mold. I found this very interesting. I did a little deep dive on this a few years ago, and it kind of ruined a particular food I'll talk about here for that we have in the holidays to me. So it's used in a lot of food. I see it all the time. On its own, sodium benzoate is harmless, right? But it can turn into a compound called benzene, which is a very well-known potent carcinogen, if it is combined with vitamin C and heat. Okay. So most, the FDA is kind of like, yeah, see, like it needs to have vitamin C and heat in order to be a problem. But sodium benzoate's fine. So they let people use it. However, how many beverages do you drink that you can think of that might have some vitamin C in it? Maybe fruit juices, even vitamin waters. The one I'm thinking of is apple cider. Apples have natural vitamin C in them. Always, around the holidays, we make spiced cider, as a holiday treat. And what do you do with spiced cider? You add oranges, spices, and you heat it. And the only place I can find apple cider without the cinnamon is directly from orchards, apple orchards. But I see it in a lot of beverages. Again, probably shouldn't be drinking beverages that have all these sugars in them to begin with, right? But very interesting. A lot of them are going to have vitamin C. And so always be careful with that one as well. Next, we have polysorbate 80. This is an emulsifier that can alter the gut microbiome. So kind of leads to more inflammation. Similar with carrageenan, also inflammation of the gut. That's used more as a thickener in a lot of non-dairy products. So, when you get into a lot of your plant milks and things like that, yeah, it's a better option, than your cow's milk, but you got to be careful with what else they're adding in there. I've had a lot of people like, oh yeah, I love some oat milk. I add that to my coffee. I drink it all the time. It's delicious. Well, first of all, they're usually adding a lot of sugar, right? Back up to our number one. How much sugar is in there? That's probably why, people enjoy it so much. Oils, they like to add oils to make it thick and creamy. And then these emulsifiers and thickeners, right? So be aware, they do have products, some great products, plant milks that don't have all these in it. At our teaching kitchen, we use soy milk. The only ingredient is soybeans that we like to get from Trader Joe's. So they're definitely out there. You can get from pretty much any store. Actually find the plant milks that are shelf stable, like in the baking aisle, tend to have less preservatives than the refrigerated ones. So check it out, see if you can find some options. So here's a couple of more examples. A lot of people turn to these flavored waters, right, to get away from the sugars. But we've got a whole list of caution red flags in here, right? There's the benzoate we talked about, sucralose, that's the Splenda. So there's a couple different artificial sweeteners, the acesulfame potassium, the EDTA. Ooh, okay, several of them in there. But then look over here to the left, Spindrift. It's one of my favorites. Carbonated water and lemon juice. 2 ingredients, I can handle that. It's delicious. No sweetness, no sweeteners, no artificial sweeteners. Great option. Here's the example I was talking about with the apple cider, the sodium benzoate. There's definitely natural vitamin C, so there's always that caution with potential for benzene to be formed. Dressings is another big one where they add a ton of stuff in there, not to mention, the salt and the sugars and the oils. But I mean, colorings, dried fruit's another one that drives me nuts. They add colorings and sugar to dried fruit. Why are we adding colorings and to fruit and sugar that's already sweet? But here we've got caramel coloring, propylene glycol, sodium benzoate, more colorings. They do have, good quality dressings. Again, you got to look for them, but I always eat my own or make my own. Super, super, super simple. Make your own dressing. Most people have these ingredients in their home. You do 1 part or 3 parts good oil to 1 part acid, and then add some seasonings in there, shake it up in a mason jar. You've got a 30-second salad dressing. That's 100% good. Here's another example of some bread. Again, the front looks good, right? It's brown. It's got honey wheat on it, but that doesn't mean whole wheat. It has to have the word whole in it. It does have some whole grain, but first ingredients that enriched flour. We've got the monoglycerides and phosphates again. This is a common one that's actually the Ezekiel bread is found in the freezer because they don't add preservatives. Bunch of whole grains, no preservatives. Bakeries would be another good option, or making your own, right? No preservatives. So, we'll jump into questions just as we wrap up here. What is our takeaways? Look for foods with ingredients you can recognize. Okay. I realize, we're not going to be perfect. There's always going to be things that we're going to run into in products, but as much as you can, read those labels, make sure it's food as much as possible. The fewer ingredients, the better. There are a few exceptions where things that have lots of spices, right, and then the ingredients list gets long, or something like that frozen meal that we looked at where the ingredients list is longer. But for the most part, I try to keep the ingredients simple, fewer. Better yet, things without a label, like an apple, right? Don't have to worry about labels on there or what they've added. And then just take one step, right? Maybe it's just picking a different product. Maybe it's not, maybe just cooking from scratch sounds like too much. That's fine. Let me just get a better quality product and start making those smaller changes, less sugar, less additives, getting in a lot more nutrients through the day. We want to get those plants in. That is where we're getting all of our nutrients, our fiber, our vitamins, minerals, those antioxidants. It's when they start processing things that we lose all of that and our health starts to suffer. So hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming. But yeah, let's jump into some of those questions.
Thank you so much, Kristi. That was such a wonderful presentation. We do have a handful of questions that have come through. Our first couple are surrounding lunch meat. So, if somebody were to get lunch meat with no nitrates, and if it were organic, is it still a health risk?
So good question. Yeah, they do minimize the preservatives and those type of products. So they tend to be better in that sense that you're not getting as many preservatives. So again, it just goes back to trying to limit the animal proteins, not going overboard with it, but that would be a better option.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question if nitrates are found in vegan meats like Impossible meat.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think I've seen them on the top of my head. However, um, those are things too that are interesting as far as just because it's plant-based doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of preservatives and artificial ingredients in it.
Hmm.
So when it comes to the Impossible Burger and the Beyond meats, you'll see a pretty big difference in ingredients. The Beyond meats tend to have less ingredients, less artificial ingredients, whereas the Impossible has a lot more processed ingredients. So that is a good question.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked what we can do to influence the FDA to be stronger regulators of food additives.
I don't even know what to say. That is a very good question. I mean, it's always like they always say, it's like writing your representatives, and really just being your own advocate, with what you're buying can also play a role with kind of the message you're sending.
True, true. Okay. There was a couple questions on what natural flavoring meant on the label.
Yes. That is a good question. It ain't doesn't I would say like for the most part, I'm not too worried about it. They have a long list of things that it includes. Spices I did look at, and it truly is just spices, but natural flavorings, the potential, I'd say the potential there is they can use chemicals to like extract the flavorings. And so those could potentially be in the food supply. But again, it's probably very minute. So I haven't seen anything like horrible with natural flavorings unless you have allergies or something you need to be concerned with and you need more specific information on what exactly they're using.
Mhm.
But they are derived from natural foods. There just might be more chemicals with how they extract it. So yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of
Okay.
a moderate ingredient.
Thank you. Okay. There was a couple questions on if it's better to just have regular sugar or to have artificial sweeteners. The idea of like coffee with creamer and pops like Diet Coke versus regular was brought up.
Hmm. Yes, always. That's always the question, right? Regular Coke or diet? My answer is always neither, but I guess that's not always an answer people want to hear. But um, I'm not a fan of artificial. Like I'm just gonna put that out there. I think there are uses for it and where you're trying to like maybe get off sugar and kind of wean down. Sometimes that can be an option. Um, monk fruit seems to be a decent option, like as far as more natural, low calorie. But again, you still have that effect on cravings and wanting more sweet. So overall, the goal is to try to get your taste buds used to not having as much sweet through the day. So like
Mhm.
both, I would say trying to wean down that craving for sugar overall, that can be both from artificial or not. Um, and so I'd try to get off artificial at least. The sugar, like I said, the goal is to stay under 24 grams for women and 36 for men. So a can of pop is 60 grams, or depending on what size you get. I usually recommend honey or pure maple syrup as a sweetener.
Okay.
And so you're still getting added sugar, but it's not refined. And so you are getting more like vitamins. There are prebiotics in honey that actually is beneficial for your gut. There's antioxidants. So you're at least getting some benefits with it and trying to stay within that 24 grams. So yeah, that's basically what I use in my coffee is a little honey, and it's adjusting your taste buds. Finding just like a plain plant milk creamer and then adding cinnamon and some honey to it can be a good way to flavor that.
Okay. Thank you. And I love the Spindrift recommendation, by the way. We did have a couple questions on if bubbly and LaCroix are okay.
Yes. So yeah, I would say those are good. They use natural flavorings, right? So again, it kind of just goes back to that other question. But yeah, they're like they call them essence of fruit. So it's kind of almost like like an oil that they extract from the fruits to flavor it.
Mhm.
But yeah, the bubbly or the spindrift, I love just because it's the food and you can actually taste a difference for sure when it comes to the flavor of those. So I prefer it just because it tastes better. But yeah, I would say those are good options too.
Thank you. Okay. Another question we have for families that have stretched financial situations, if they're wanting to avoid chemicals and additives, what are some recommendations that you might have for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's always a concern with people trying to eat healthier. The things that have preservatives, they stay on the shelf longer. And so it makes the products cheaper, and they're using less quality. So one thing is like if you can do, it would just it takes a little bit more planning ahead when it comes to a budget piece. Where if you're getting things in bulk or that is not as processed, it actually ends up saving a lot of money. For example, brown rice, quinoa you can get in bulk is going to be a lot less expensive than, some of those boxed macaronis and things like that. like those kind of starches. Whole baked potatoes, that you can buy are going to be a lot less expensive. Using beans, you can't get any cheaper than beans. Even if you're getting them dried, again, nothing added to those. But you can find some good canned options. And frozen is great. A lot of frozen products are nice because they don't have to add preservatives. The freezing is preserving it. So a
Mhm.
lot of those you can find very clean. And so I think it gets back to kind of that planning ahead where you're doing more from home and using more of those whole ingredients. Doesn't have to take long. You just have to think ahead. When I switched to really eating more plant-based, my grocery bill, and I did this challenge where I was doing organic plant-based, and my grocery bill dropped from what I was normally buying
Mm.
even getting organic food. So I thought that was interesting just because when you're eating more whole foods and less meat, which is the most expensive, you end up saving money. So I'd say a lot of the planning and focusing on those like bulk items and less of those kind of ready to eat items.
Okay. Okay. There was a couple questions regarding plant-based milk. So if somebody were allergic to soy, what recommendations you might have for that, or specific brands that you might like better?
Mm, yeah, um I find there are a lot. I'm trying to think if there are specific brands that I go to. I tend to get a big box from Costco of almond milk that are shelf stable.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, even like with the oat milk, like I said, I get the ones that are in the baking aisle that are shelf stable. They tend to not have the oils. If you get the unsweetened, they're not going to have the sugars and less of the additives to them. So I'd check out that aisle for sure. Um, and different brands, like I know the Califia has like carrageenan free. Um, and going to more specialty stores, I've seen a couple that have the only ingredient is just that nut or grain that they're making the milk out of. And so those are going to cost a little bit more, but you can also make your own if you really are adventurous. You literally just blend, soak it, blend it, and then strain it through like a cheesecloth, and you've made your own plant milk. And you can do a lot with kind of the leftovers that you're straining out to cook with too.
Hmm.
So that's an option as well if you have like some severe allergies and things like that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Um, so a couple other questions regarding some specific additives. We had a couple questions on if chicory root extract is okay.
Yes, so that is a fiber, right? So that should be fine, right? Kind of helps with the gut health. So yeah, those fiber additives are okay.
Okay. There was also questions on if palm oil is okay. A couple people noticed that they're in things that perceived to be healthy, like Natural Bliss creamer, for example.
Yep. So it's used often in place of the hydrogenated oils because it gives that creamy kind of thicker texture to things. Um, and it is a saturated fat. So it's not something that you want to do in large quantities, kind of like the same family as that coconut oil. It can have similar effects to saturated fat with our cholesterol, inflammation. So um, kind of being more careful with those type of things. Again, it's also going to have more calories to it, so you want to be careful. But yeah, it is used a little bit more to kind of make things thick. So that's something you want to use just like any oil in moderation and try not to go crazy with it. I wouldn't say it's like a healthy oil that's going to give you health benefits.
Okay. Thank you, Kristi. I apologize we weren't able to get all to all the questions today, but thank you so much, everyone, for putting in your questions. We really appreciate it. I just want to thank you all for attending today. We're going to see you 1 week from now in our live webinar with Chef Sam. I'm really excited to attend that and learn a little bit more from her. But you will get an email with the next week's challenge details on Monday morning, as well as the Zoom links for the upcoming week. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.